The death toll continues to rise in the Florida condo collapse. While over at the Capitol, the fence is coming down 6 months after the Capitol breach. The Biden administration slapped with a lawsuit from North Dakota. The state is suing the administration for suspending new oil and gas leases on federal land and water. The lawsuit argues it'll cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue. And a convicted murderer won election to office in D.C., all while behind bars. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. The death toll continues to rise in Florida. Miami-Dade's mayor says 14 more bodies have been recovered, bringing the death toll up to 78. The number of unaccounted for has gone down to 62. That's as of Friday morning. Officials believe they'll recover the remaining ones by next week. But it's not just bodies. Among the rubble, officials also searching to recover people's possessions. Surfside's mayor says crews are using GPS technology to figure out who the items may belong to.
Those items are being guarded 24 hours a day. Everything you can imagine has been recovered and processed. This process will continue until every bit of debris is gone through.
The search and rescue operations aren't without risks either. 3 first responders injured at the collapse site. While the tragedy in Florida continues to unfold, the fence is coming down in the nation's capital. It's been 6 months since the fence went up after the Capitol breach. Capitol Police said in an email to Congress members that removal is expected to begin as early as Friday and conclude within 2 to 3 days, weather permitting. But the Capitol will remain closed to most visitors. The closure is already the longest in its history, about 16 months since the pandemic started. In the weeks after the January 6th Capitol breach, thousands of National Guard troops were deployed and 7-foot fencing was installed to protect the complex. Now, staying in the Capitol, President Biden is promising to end $90 billion worth of tax breaks for the fossil fuel industry. The extra revenue would fund some of his Build Back Better plan, and it would also likely increase gas prices. Biden emphasized a tax increase on energy firms to fund part of his American Families Plan at a speech in Crystal Lake, Illinois on Wednesday.
If we end tax breaks for fossil fuels, make polluters pay to clean up the messes they've made, that would raise $90 billion. I'm not asking them to do anything that is unfair.
Biden's announcement comes as the nation's average gas prices surge as the economy recovers, demand grows, and supply strives to keep up. Energy companies have opposed Biden's tax proposals since they were introduced. According to The Hill, American Petroleum Institute President Mike Summers says increased taxes on American energy will only undermine economic recovery and job creation, push natural gas and oil investments overseas, and lead to less government revenue, not more. Democrats are hoping to pass Biden's American Families Plan and part of his jobs plan through a reconciliation process in the Senate. Republicans have vowed to stop it. To fund his plans, Biden wants to increase taxes on big corporations and wealthy Americans and implement tighter IRS enforcement. Now, speaking of rising taxes, one part of Biden's proposal includes a minimum global tax of at least 15%. The goal is to essentially get rid of tax havens to even the playing field and get companies to invest back home. While 130 countries have backed the proposed plan, 9 countries oppose it. The 9 countries are Ireland, Estonia, Hungary, Peru, Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, and Kenya. Let's take a moment to look at each country. Ireland has a corporate tax of 12.5%, and because of that, it has attracted many big U.S. tech firms. Ireland's finance minister says he would not join the other signatories, but would still try to find an outcome he could back. He says, "I was not in a position to join the consensus on the agreement, and specifically a global minimum effective tax rate of at least 15% today." Adding, "I have expressed Ireland's reservation, but remain committed to the process and aim to find an outcome that Ireland can yet support." Hungary, meanwhile, has a corporate tax of 9%. Hungary's finance minister dismisses the 15% rate as too high, saying the global minimum tax would obstruct economic growth. The planned 15% tax rate is too high, and it shouldn't be levied on real economic activity. But he said Hungary would continue to negotiate. Now let's turn to Estonia, which has a corporate tax rate of 20%, but there's a 14% option for some companies. Peru, meanwhile, has a corporate tax rate of 29.5%. As for Barbados, the corporate tax rate is between 0% and 5.5%. It's essentially a tax haven. St. Vincent and the Grenadines have a corporate tax rate of 30%. Sri Lanka has a corporate tax rate of 14% for most types of businesses. Nigeria has a corporate tax rate of 30% for high-income companies, 20% for medium-level income companies, and 0% for small companies. And as for Kenya, the country has a corporate tax rate of 37.5% for branches of foreign companies and 30% for domestic companies. The OECD has estimated that a global minimum corporate income tax rate of at least 15% will generate around $150 billion in additional global tax revenues per year. It's set to take effect in 2023. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is expected to press G20 counterparts for a global minimum corporate tax rate above the 15% floor. But a rate decision is not expected until future phases of negotiations. The deal is widely expected to be endorsed by G20 finance leaders when they meet this weekend in Venice, Italy. Now, turning back to the states, the Biden administration seeing more lawsuits. North Dakota has sued the Biden administration for suspending new oil and gas leases on federal land and water. The lawsuit says the suspension will cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue. It says that 2 canceled sales this year alone have cost the state over $82 million. President Biden ordered a halt on new oil and gas lease sales in his first days in office, citing worries about climate change. The North Dakota lawsuit argues that Biden's move was unlawful. It wants the court to restore the canceled leases and block any future cancellations. Last month, a judge in Louisiana temporarily blocked Biden's suspension. Still, the administration continues to develop plans that could extend the ban or make leases more expensive. Louisiana's Attorney General called last month's temporary suspension a win, saying in a statement, "This is a victory not only for the rule of law, but also for the thousands of workers who produce affordable energy for Americans." The suspension means that Biden's plans to suspend new oil and gas leases on federal lands and water is halted temporarily. The lawsuit alleges the Biden administration violated provisions of the Administrative Procedure Act. It also accuses Biden of exceeding his powers. Biden signed the order on his first day in office. It states the federal government must advance environmental justice and, among other efforts, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and bolster resilience to the impacts of climate change. But the lawsuit argued that Biden overstepped, saying the administration skipped key steps, such as comment periods and other bureaucratic steps required. They also argue the move would cost the states money and jobs. It's a stance shared by the judge, who said in a memo at the time the plaintiff states' claims are essential. Millions and possibly billions of dollars are at stake. The judge also said the Biden administration failed to provide sufficient rationale for its decision by imposing the moratorium. The 13 other states that joined Louisiana in the lawsuit are Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia. And Canadian energy company TC Energy is seeking $15 billion in damages from the United States. That's over Biden's decision to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline project. The company said in a statement it had filed a notice of intent with the State Department to begin a legacy North American Free Trade Agreement claim under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. The company said it aims to recover economic damages resulting from the revocation of the Keystone XL project's presidential permit, adding that it suffered a loss of more than $15 billion as a result of the U.S. government's breach of its NAFTA obligations. TC Energy first proposed the pipeline back in 2008. The pipeline would have moved over 800,000 barrels or 35 million gallons of crude oil every day, 1,200 miles from Canada through Nebraska to the Gulf Coast. The pipeline's construction was meant to create and sustain thousands of jobs and advance the U.S. to achieving energy independence. It was also designed to improve commercial relations with Canada and provide tax revenues to high-poverty areas. Environmental groups argue the pipeline would have lasting effects on the environment. When first taking office, Biden said in his executive order, canceling the pipeline was needed because the pipeline disturbs the U.S. national interest. But Biden faced significant pushback from Republicans and industry groups after reversing the Trump-era move. 21 states sued Biden over the Keystone XL pipeline suspension. Texas and Montana spearheaded the move. They argued that the president did not have the authority to unilaterally change an energy policy that Congress had set when he revoked the permit on his first day in office. That power, the lawsuit argues, rests with Congress. That is, the power to regulate interstate and international commerce, including granting or rejecting permits for oil pipelines that cross an international border. And now, before we head into the weekend, in news you don't hear every day, a convicted murderer won election to office in D.C., all while behind bars. 44-year-old Joel Caston is still behind bars. He's now the first incarcerated person to be elected to public office in D.C. He'll fill a vacant slot at one of D.C.'s Advisory Neighborhood Commissions, or ANCS. The commission advises the local government on neighborhood issues, such as police protection, parking, zoning, liquor licensing, and trash collection. Caston has been in jail for 26 years for first-degree murder. Back in 1994, he killed an 18-year-old. He was also 18 at the time. He's currently behind bars at the D.C. Central Detention Facility and is expected to be released either this or next year. The other 4 candidates he went up against are in the same jail as him. Chairman of the 7F Advisory Neighborhood Commission said it's an important step, saying representation is an important part of equity and inclusion. Caston said in a campaign video, "My platform will be used to restore the dignity of incarcerated people, that we will no longer be judged by our worst mistake, and to establish equality for both the male and female populations." Adding, "I will be your biggest advocate to make sure your voice and your concerns are heard." He pledges to represent his constituents both in and out of jail. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive and have a wonderful weekend.